on Fridays and Saturday nights, the parents sell them for the weekend by the hour to people in the neighborhood. So when they come back on Monday, we just love them. That's it.
Yeah.
We don't ask them to take tests. We don't ask them to sit up straight. We love them. And I'm like, this is real. Sure, I've had trauma, but not like that, bro. Not like that, man. Now, this isn't someone who is sitting at home watching TV and he's like, oh man, I want to go hook up with a minor today. No, it doesn't happen like that. It starts with usually a bad parent relationship. And then it starts with an addiction to porn. I think the numbers are 80 to 90% of all pedophiles have a porn addiction. And it wrecks your mind.
Welcome to the Alive and Well podcast, where my hope is that we create transformation from the inside out. And as I try to speak with people who want the same for you, today our special guest is Schuyler. Last name is hard to pronounce. Why don't you pronounce it for the people?
Well, I can tell you it's definitely not Scaglion, whatever you said. It's Scaglione, unless I owe you money, and then it's Scaglion.
Where is that from? It sounds like it's Italian.
Sicilian, technically,
yes.
yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good with my geography.
But it's really just my last name because I think I did my DNA thing and I was like 15% Italian.
Okay.
Yeah. So like everyone, they see Scaglione and they're like, do you know anyone? And I'm like, no, it's literally just my last name. That's it.
I'm 99% Indian, 1% gangster.
Okay. I can tell the Indian. I couldn't see the gangster though.
It's 1%.
Yeah. You got to look real hard.
All right. Let's do a little introduction to your background and just some of the things that you are currently doing and working on, so that the people kind of get a gist of who and what you kind of do.
Sure. So I am a person with a biblical worldview. Just started like that. I look at everything through the lens of the creation narrative, and the Bible is my map to figure things out. I believe that's the way a Christian should be. So because that's the way that I view things, I find myself geared more towards the humanitarian world of nonprofits and ministry and things like that. So the reason that you and I are here today is because of the work that I did with a nonprofit called One More Child, which is a wonderful, really big, 300 or 400 employees now. It's blowing up, man.
Yeah. From
Texas all the way down to Miami. I think maybe even the Keys now. But anyway, I was blessed to take a job with them a couple years ago, starting up a brand new division at their company that got into the school systems and dealt with what you call Title I students, which we can explain that later if we need to. But so I find myself specializing in human connection. I think that's a pretty good way to describe it. As similar to what you do. Mine's just probably more from the intrinsic nature, the soul care, if you will. And I'm getting my physical care on board as well too, Chris. Don't judge me.
Yeah. No judgment zone. Before we kind of jump into the ins and outs of what you do and just kind of where your life is at, I always like to get a glimpse of people's past life because in my thought process, your past really shapes some of who you are and the thoughts you think to the person you are today. So can you tell us a little bit about young Sky? What was he like?
Yo, young Sky was wild. So I was the youngest of 3 kids. I had 2 twin sisters. And the dynamic in my house was interesting. I used to use more flagrant words than that because I was angry for a long time at the way that I grew up. Mm-hmm. And now I've come to know that even the nurture and the nature prepares you for kind of where you're headed and what your interests are. And I've come to be thankful for the hard times. And my childhood was full of churches. I was always at a revival or, my dad was in ministry, my mom was in ministry. So I was always one of those kids that were at church. Every time the doors were open, every time the lights were on, I was there. And, but not in my spirit. Like I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. I knew all of the ritualistic things. It was more religious to my point of view, which is, a lot of people might find themselves there. So I kind of knew how it all worked and how to act in church, but outside of church, man, I was on one constantly. on one constantly. And whether it was chasing girls or which turned into nicotine, marijuana, alcohol, pills, all kinds of addictions, in and out of rehab on a 21 pill mental health regimen.
Wow.
It was nasty, bro. It was nasty. My life was bad, but I was still trying to be a father, and I was still trying to be a husband, and I just couldn't do it. I was in a lot of trouble, and I escaped a lot of legal issues just because I never got caught. It was one of those things where had I got caught, I might still be there today, like 20 years later.
Yeah.
And so obviously that story goes way deeper, but that kind of shows you kind of where I was to where I am now. It's totally different. My life is now others focused, whereas for 33 years, it was me focused constantly.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship with your parents? How did that affect you when you were young to how it affects you now? And is that relationship good or bad in your opinion? What do you think?
It's probably better than it ever has been. And I think because of biblical principles that I believe are true, I've put them into action and I found them to be true. You know, you have to be a friend first before you can make friends. And that's in Proverbs. And even with my parents, my dad and I had a tumultuous relationship because I didn't see much there that I wanted to model, if that makes sense. Okay. And actually, I saw a lot there that I wanted to anti-model. It was our relationship was brutal, and it wasn't all bad, right? My dad has some wonderful qualities, but he went through a ton of trauma, and I don't think many people are willing to dive into that. They see him as this bravado man that is kind of just unique, right? And sometimes hard to handle, and sometimes hard to be around. But what they don't know is that at 17, he watched his mom die in the hospital bed. Bro, what does that do to someone?
Yeah.
What is that? That almost throws nature out the window. Like the nurture value of that is extremely high. So as someone who is philosophical in nature with my thought process, I started trying to unpack things for him in my chair. I'm reading, I'm looking up books, and I'm like, how could this affect him? And it's a tremendous effect when your best friend dies in front of you. I mean, your savior literally dies in front of you. It ruins the inner part of a man doesn't fully mature until they say that women mature at a much quicker rate, and some of the things that I would do with the students, and we'll get into this in a second, but I would explain to them, a man doesn't mature until 24, 25 sometimes. It takes a long time for that to happen. So when something like that happens at 17, it stunts your growth exponentially unless you're willing to deal. And that was always my fault with him, is he wasn't willing to deal. So now he's 63, 64, something like that. And we just had lunch the other day, and we have a much better relationship than we've ever had because I softened my stance and I allowed him in, and we are mending our relationship. Now, my mom has always been kind of cool to me. Yeah. She was always like a friend to me. And I'm starting to realize that she's not very talkative. I didn't realize this growing up. She's not very talkative. I am. And so I always get frustrated, why won't you talk to me? And that's just her nature is to be quiet. And I didn't know that. So to answer your question, there was a way different dynamic with my parents, and it shaped a lot of my thought processes. And now I'm just starting to kind of figure it out at 39.
You think your mom is more of a physical, what is the 5 love languages? The one that is more spend time and quality around you?
That's a good question. I know my dad is words of affirmation and acts of service. He wants to be number one in someone's life. And that used to drive me nuts, but I get it. I really do get it. And then my mom, man, if I had to get her to fill that out, I would say that she's probably quality time.
So then what about you?
I am also words of affirmation. Even to my dismay, I didn't want to answer. I did not. When I used to take these things, for work.
Yeah.
We had to go through personality profiles too. And I hated that was true for me, because I was like, that means I'm, you know what I mean? You go through all this, I'm just like him, but really I understand him more because I understand me. And I do like it when my wife says, hey, good job, babe. You're a good husband, or something like that. And it means a lot to me.
Do you think that it has changed over the last couple of years that you're more words of affirmation, or do you think that is from childhood? And the only reason I ask is because I kind of know you. So maybe from when you were younger, where you said for 30 some years you were really struggling, where you probably were trying to be this person that is better for everyone around you, and maybe you didn't hear it as much, and now you're like accepting that. Does that make sense how I say that?
It does make sense. I think you're right about I was trying to be what I thought was right. But inside I wasn't, you know what I mean? I wasn't. And I think as far as the words of affirmation goes, I don't know. I don't know, man. I just feel like for everything I've been through, and it's not just with my parents, I've been through a lot of stuff. It just seemed like my whole life, I always got this message of, no matter what, you want to talk about a high GPA, and you want to talk about excelling at sports and all these things that the Lord blessed me with. I always just wanted acceptance, man. And I think that's a human thing, but I never quite got that. Even as being married, I never felt accepted. So I think when someone says to me, I see you and I think you're good just like that, it does me a lot, because I always felt undervalued or underappreciated would probably be a good word.
Yeah.
And I had no identity, bro. No identity whatsoever. I just knew that I was a kid that got in trouble from a broken home, from not going to go anywhere quick. And that was my identity for a long time.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think it really does start with the place of identity and how we view ourselves. And from a spiritual side, there's usually a higher being involved. And so that higher being can give you a sense of identity. Mm-hmm. When you don't have that soul or spiritual side, you're trying to create your own identity.
Yeah.
You could probably agree that it starts to go down the wrong path when you're trying to identify yourself, what your identity is.
Because it always changes.
Yeah.
Like it's, as soon as you, let's say for a minute there, my identity was into the female world, right? Well, at some point I started putting on weight and I started losing my hair. And not that, I was already married, don't get me wrong, but what happened if my identity was still females at that point? I would have had to change to something else because that wouldn't have worked anymore. So we have to have this eternal identity. And no matter our personal human value, our identity has to transcend that for it to mean anything. Yeah. And that's what I was missing.
Yeah, no, that's good. When you were growing up, you talked a little bit about you really coming around to your soul health and it's starting to see some changes in your physical health. Can we touch a little bit about your physical health? Because in this podcast, I believe that soul health really does equate to better physical health and mental health.
Sure.
And so when you were younger, did you care about your physical health? Like, what was that? You said you were an athlete. You're really good. What did that look like?
I never had to. I just always was in shape because I was always active. I was playing sports 5 nights, 6 nights a week, sometimes 7 nights a week from 5th grade until I was 21. And then after that, it was 3 nights a week. And it was working out and it was, doing some type of training. Like I didn't start putting on weight. I was always about 175. And for me, that was pretty filled out. That was pretty wasn't scrawny by any means, but I also wasn't fat. I didn't have a ton of extra weight. Yeah. But then I started getting depressed and I started getting a lot of anxiety and I had to take all this medicine and it was just weight gain, which in turn made me more depressed and more anxious because I wasn't used to that. I wasn't like a kid that grew up like that and I was used to it. Yeah. I had to go from medium clothes to large to XL to 2XL to 3XL. And you want to talk about messing you up, man. That's rough. And I was 305 about 3 years ago now. And I was 249 this morning. Nice. And I'm just I didn't understand what food was to me until I started to do this soul care. I started to understand that when I got stressed, it was a comfort thing for me. It was, for some reason, right before I went to sleep, I couldn't sleep unless I had a full stomach.
Okay.
I just, you're supposed to go to bed a couple hours after you eat. You're not supposed to go to bed with, and I was 1,000 calories, 1,500 calories. I mean, sitting on the couch, falling asleep. And there was some kind of stronghold, which in the religious world is when you have a wrong belief about something, and it creates the way that you think about life. It's a stronghold. And the Bible tells us the only way to break that is to compare it with truth. Right? That's the only way to do it. It's like if I have a stronghold of I must eat before I go to bed or I won't go to sleep, but then the truth is revealed in front of me that Christ cares so much for me that he'll take care of that, then you can break a stronghold. That's kind of how it works. So as I started maturing and introspectively looking at things, I started to see like, whoa, that's unhealthy. That is not self-discipline. It's the fruit for me. If you look in Galatians, it'll talk about the fruit of what it looks like to live a balanced Christian life. And self-discipline is right there.
Yeah.
It's right there. But I didn't understand that. I still had all these other addictions to work on. And now being addiction free, thank the Lord, I'm working on my food.
Yeah.
And it's been helpful.
This is a peculiar question. Do you think that weight loss, losing weight, healthiness is easier or harder when you're Christian?
That's a tough one, right? It's a tough one because before I was a Christian, I was in shape. And that's wild because my identity was that. I was someone who was an athlete. I was at the courts. I was playing pickup ball all the time. Like I was a hooper or whatever, or football or whatever it was. I was a person who competes. And then that started to change. And then a person who doesn't compete, even if it's aerobic exercise, you have to have some sort of competition mind to be like, I'm going to get my personal best, or I'm going to meet my 60-minute mark, or going to get my heart rate to 140, something, right? Yeah. Because without a goal, what are you even doing? Yeah. So when that competitive nature loses, and then you take on Christianity as an identity, now it's no longer about competitiveness. It's about servitude. It's about walking out a mission that was given to you. So it's a totally different way to think about it, but I don't know how to answer that question.
Yeah, it's different, right? Yeah. I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and just kind of talk about your mental side of life during your season of when maybe the darker days, if you want to categorize it like that. You said you were taking a lot of pills. I know you're not like a medical professional, but in that sense that you were the patient and taking all these pills, you kind of mentioned there was like a cycle. You would take a pill, then you would feel worse. You take a pill, you feel worse. What do you feel like is the problem or the dilemma when somebody has to take these pills? Yeah. Did you want to take pills at that time? Like
I wanted to take anything. I didn't care. Help me. Help me. I was in psychiatric care for 14 years. And a lot of times it was weekly psychiatric care. I wasn't like a patient that ever really saw much relief for more than 2 weeks because, like when you get to a point where you're considered stable, the psychiatrist will spread you out every 3 months or every 6 months or something like that. Come see me once a year just to make sure you're stable. Yeah. I never got more than like 2 weeks. It was like, I remember one time I got a month and I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. I don't have to see him for a month. But then sure enough, it was bad. So I just remember thinking like, why can't y'all figure this out? Yeah. Like I'm being honest with you. Yeah. And I'm telling you everything that's wrong with me. I'm not hiding anything. I'm not looking for perk 30s. I'm not asking for Xanax. Like I'm just telling you I can't live. And try this. Okay. Now try this with this. Okay, now try this in the morning. It was like they would always tell me you got to find the perfect cocktail. Oh man! And seriously, and I was always searching for that perfect cocktail, bro, and it never happened. Yeah, never happened, and it was miserable. Yeah, because I couldn't be. There was a lot of side effects. Put it that way. There's a lot of side effects, and it had a lot to do with me as a man, bro. And I was so desperate for help. I was willing to literally lose everything just to find some sort of peace in my life. And all they would say is, try another pill.
Mental health is talked about a lot. And nowadays you at least will be referred to a therapist, somebody that you can talk to his problems. They might prescribe a medication, something like that. As somebody who is now following the Christian worldview and the God of the Bible, what is your thoughts on mental health versus like a spiritual kind of warfare, as the Christian people would say it?
The brain is an organ. Fair. And the brain is affected just like our body. It's part of our body. And sometimes because of trauma, I'm a trauma-informed care specialist. So I had to learn all these things, and it really opened my eyes to just the way thoughts in my head come through. Even now, I'm like, dang, if I took credit for that thought, bro, I would be like so mad. Like, where did that come from? But I've come to know that your brain fires thoughts.
Yeah.
And based on how your brain's been treated is the thoughts that it produces. If you come from a Midwest, Kansas, just a real wholesome house where dad works, mom stays home, and all the kids are raised in a biblical worldview, and they work with their hands, like just a traditional life, right? You'll find that those people have much more healthy thoughts than someone who's raised in a toxic house. Mm-hmm. The brain gets affected. So I think that the brain sometimes does need treatment, but I think the mind is up for grabs, And like when Paul says in Romans 12, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. He's not talking about your brain. He's talking about the lens that your brain works through. It's a way you see things. It's the way you process things. It's like if my wife yells at me, my brain, because of the way that I've been conditioned, wants to yell right back. Yeah. But I've got a new mind now. I've got the mind of Christ. And I'm like, I have two options, I have my original option, or I have the way that I think is the proper way to respond. Yeah. So I do think there are times when someone's been through so much trauma, like some of these women that get dealt with at One More Child. They come from trafficking situations, and brother, they can't even, nothing's real right now. They need to be reset on a better foundation. And until that can be put in place, sometimes medicine is the safest thing they can do. But for me, that was the only option that they gave me. Even my therapist was a worldview person. So she kept on treating me with the world's ideas, and then I'd go to a psychiatrist to be treated with the world's medicine. And all along, no one ever was asking me, what do you think about life? Like, no one told me, like, hey, what's going on up here? All they wanted to know was, what were the effects that I was having? Does that make sense?
Yeah. You've experienced in your own life a lot of trauma, and you've seen a lot of trauma either through your job or through others. The word trauma gets thrown around a lot today, and I want to be respectful to people that actually have had trauma.
Yes.
Okay. When being around the organization One More Child, they experience some pretty deep traumas.
Yeah.
Without, obviously to your discretion, can you talk about what real trauma is?
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit of how you've seen it affect them as they've either gotten older or just in the moments.
Yeah. I've seen it in various ways. Like, it's funny that you, at least from what I've seen, there is no direct result of trauma. It varies as to how someone's going to handle it and process it. I remember I had this one student who would never talk, right? And this was like 7th, 8th grader, never talk. And this was a school that is probably what you consider Title I, high crime, high attendance issues, low test scores, like that type of setting, right? And And I remember asking the teacher, because I would go in as a guest and I would teach emotional and mental health awareness to these students. And come to find out, the students were about 3 phases of therapy away from that. We were coming in very hopeful, but the schools we went to, a lot of times, the trauma had reverted them so low into their personality that they weren't even available for therapy. They just weren't available. They were almost like I think they call in the gaming world a bot. You know what I'm talking about? They just roamed around.
Yeah.
Inside was dead. It was gone. And I remember asking this teacher, why does that student never say anything? Hoodie up. I'm like, don't you want to have them take their, no. We're just happy they're here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, that's foreign to me, right?
Yeah.
I'm used to being in the youth, trying to hold these kids accountable, and bro, take your hoodie down. You're in church. Like, come on. And they would understand, or at least have some respect and do what you say. But this student was, we don't ask them to do anything. We're just happy they're here. So of course, having an inquisitive mind, I was like, why? Right? And this was a Monday. And man, this like, you want to talk about breaking your heart. So the teacher pulled me to the side and they're like, there's 2 of them. And I'm kind of going to give away, I'll try not to, but on Fridays and Saturday nights, the parents sell them for the weekend by the hour to people in the neighborhood. So when they come back on Monday, we just love them. That's it.
Yeah.
We don't ask them to take tests. We don't ask them to sit up straight. We love them. And I'm like, this is real.
Yeah.
This is real. This is trafficking. This is the dark web. This is the underbelly of society. And I'm in it. So I'm trying to figure out from sure, I've had trauma, but not like that, bro. Not like that, man. Like, yeah, I've been affected quite a bit from brain development from trauma, for sure. I can talk about my personal trauma, but that never happened to me.
Yeah.
You know? And so I start getting into these school systems like that, and it's just very eye-opening to what's actually going on.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
7th, 8th graders by the hour.
The notion of one more child, from what I was reading, was they help with sex trafficking, low income. They help with fostering kids.
One More Child is a Christ first organization, unapologetically. And that's different. I mean, even with Christian nonprofits, that's different. And I was working with another nonprofit who was Christian in office only, right? And I know there's rules. Like the reason my whole leg has tattoos on them is because I couldn't say the name Jesus unless someone asked me about it. So I would put these tattoos on my legs so they could be like, what is that, right? And now I have a door, without getting in trouble to talk about these things. But One More Child is so, from what I experienced, so good with their resources, man. There's no trouble. There's no mismanagement. The president is in the trenches with everyone else, and they're always looking to help people, always. And of course, they have protocols like everything, like you got to go through. And I'm sure there's some stories out there where expectations weren't met. That's just the way it works. But I know that I got every tool I needed to do the job that I needed to do. And they've been around since 1914, I think. Long time, over 100 years. And the main thing that they do is child placement services. So they have a lot of children who, and this is cool, I've never really seen this. They have children that are on like the extreme needs list, and then they have children that are on the list of not so extreme. So they tell you straight up, it's best if you adopt this kid because he has no running water, he has no food, he has no shelter, whereas this one goes to a school, but they just don't have much income, right?
Yeah.
So I think that they've done an amazing job with that. And as a staff, they do mission trips together.
Yeah.
And that's cool. They go and see the kids that they sponsor, and they always offer the opportunity for someone to do that. And they're really making tangible impact into these kids' lives.
Yeah. when you talk about sex trafficking, there's been a big push for sure in Florida, especially along I-4 corridor, of people trying to be more aware, more cautious on what sex trafficking is and what it looks like. Can you maybe give us a little bit of a glimpse of like the signs of if sex trafficking is happening around and maybe we're not being aware of it?
Sure. I'm nowhere near an expert on this because the field that I was in was student related. From what I know, a couple of the signs that we see are what's called grooming, and it's happens a lot on these digital platforms. There's like Snapchat, they look for you on the map. And if you have a picture of you at the Lakeland Mall 5 minutes ago, they're headed that way. They're actively, this is their business. This is their lifestyle. This isn't someone who is sitting at home watching TV and he's like, oh man, I want to go hook up with a minor today. No, it doesn't happen like that. It starts with usually a bad parent relationship. And then it starts with an addiction to porn. I think the numbers are 80 to 90% of all pedophiles have a porn addiction. And it wrecks your mind and it changes the way you see everything. And then you start limiting they say porn is the worst drug that's ever happened in the world. And it changes the way you see things. So now what was a young person playing on the playground is now an option, is now enticing, is now, I've never done that before. It becomes this demonic affair that overtakes people. And the way that in real life, how it kind of looks is sometimes you'll get friends on your social media platform. They'll start chatting with you and they'll try and sell you things, or they'll meet up with you on Facebook Marketplace, or they will follow you home and put like some kind of marker on your door or on your mailbox so that they might have a red ribbon tied to your mailbox and you don't even know. But the guy who's coming around that night, they see the red ribbon. Wow. And they know that that's the marked house of the parents aren't home or something like that. And then a lot of times shooting porn is the way that girls get into it because they are low on money. They give them $1,000 to make a video. $1,000 runs out. Next thing you know, they give you $1,000 to make 2 videos. Then some of these people are making 10 videos a day. Wow. And how do you support that? You have to be high. So now your $1,000 you get paid for in dope. You get heroin or meth or whatever you need to keep shooting those videos. It's this triangle of these demonic gods, bro. And they've been at it for a long time. Yeah. And sex trafficking is we're making a lot of, well, I say we as One More Child, but One More Child is making a big dent in it in the Polk and the Hillsborough County areas. And they work with Brady Judd. And they go on stings with them and they break up these big circles and they're doing their very, very best. But it's an epidemic.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to thank you for bringing some of that information and education. And we'll definitely put the link to One More Child and how you can support them in the show notes. And we definitely want to be a part of the light to the world.
Yes.
Because as much as we are a medical health and education kind of podcast, there is real trauma and medical problems and mental problems that these people face, and bringing light to the situation to try to eradicate or decrease the numbers is part of the goal. And so however we can kind of teach and educate and show people that let's not be ignorant of what's happening, but let's be more self-aware of our surroundings and those things that are happening. So thank you, Schuyler, just for that.
Sure.
And going there. We talk about trauma with children that you've seen around. I know you've experienced your own trauma. I do want to talk a little bit about your story of your sickness. You had a near-death experience or death experience.
Yeah.
And you worked through a lot of things since then. Can you describe or maybe talk a little bit about what happened and the circumstances that led up to that and how your life maybe had changed since then?
Sure. If it's a very long story, a lot of details because it encompassed a lot of time. But I got super sick back in 2021, and it was during the COVID pandemic. And I went and got tested and turned out to be negative, wasn't COVID. So I just kind of did what I thought to do with the flu, and I just laid in bed and tried to get fluid and stuff like that, and it would pass. Well, like day 7 in the bed, and I'm cutting out details. My wife knows all this stuff. But like say day 7, I wasn't getting up at all. It was like 24 hours in the bed. It was just like, you know, it wasn't looking good. So my wife got me up to go to the actual primary care, and they walked in and she's like, I don't even need to test you. I can tell you have COVID. And I'm kind of like out of it. I don't know what's going on, but I'm just trying to like get help, you know? So she was like, at this point, there's really not much you can do. This was still kind of early on. No one really knew anything. So I just went back home, took ibuprofen or whatever. It was like day 8, day 9. My wife comes in to check on me, and I was a gray, like a bluish gray color. My lips, my everything. And we don't know anything at this point, but she knew that wasn't good, right? So she calls a friend of mine who's a nurse. Shout out Amanda Dilport. Always appreciate you. And Amanda said, you need to check his oxygen. That's like an oxygen problem when they start looking like that. So my wife, actually Amanda drove over. Remember, this is during the height of pandemics. Like there's social distancing. Yeah. No one was allowed to be around each other. Amanda came and like put the pulse ox on the front door. My wife went out and got it. It was a wild time. And she put it on my finger and it said 61 for my oxygen percentage.
Jeez.
And my wife's like, she calls Amanda. Amanda's out on the front yard. She's like, 61. Amanda's like, that's not right. Go do it again. Try another finger. Well, I have the pictures of this, and it's kind of eerie, honestly, because let's just say the time was 1:39 p.m., 61. My wife kept checking it every minute. 1:30 or 1:40 p.m., 59. 1:41 p.m., 58. 1:43. I was dying like slowly on my way. Ooh. And so the time that she called the paramedics, it was that she had me at 56% oxygen, and I was out of it, dude. You know, with that low of oxygen, like you're not even functioning. I'm just like, I'm out of it. But I remember getting up and coming to sit on the couch with the paramedics, and they're like, we can give you oxygen here or you can go to the hospital. And my wife was like, no, he's going to the hospital. Yeah. Like, yeah, he's going. So I like blacked out. I remember not knowing much. And I went to South Florida here in Plant City, and they tried their best. They had me for 10 days. I immediately went into a ICU. They put me on a coma the first day I was there. And they ended up thankfully saying they couldn't help me. They didn't have what I needed because it's not a high trauma hospital. Yeah. You know, it's like a neighborhood hospital. So they said for me to even have a chance of survival, I had to get on this thing called ECMO, which is it's the highest form of life support there is in the world, put it that way. And they're like, the only way you have a chance is to be on that, but only St. Joe's, Shands, and Gainesville, and I think Tampa General. There's the only 3 at that time that had it. Well, Tampa General denied me because I was overweight. I was a smoker back then. I was on pills back then. I didn't fit the candidacy role for $1 million procedure. Wow. You know, I wasn't. They want to spend, if they're going to spend $1 million on someone, it's going to be someone who has a chance. I had no chance. So finally, by the grace of God, St. Joe's said, we'll give it a shot in Tampa. And they had not had a single person survive ECMO since the pandemic started in 2019. Every single person died that they tried. Every single person died that they tried. So their mindset was, we'll just try something new with him because everyone's died. He's going to die, literally. I think they said I had like a 3% chance of survival. Wow. He's going to die anyway. So let's just mess with the formula a little bit to see if it works. Well, so I got approved on, I think, day 10 in ICU. And I'm waiting I'm in a coma, right? I have no idea what's going on, but my wife does. They're calling her, telling her, make plans for the funeral. I'm in a prone position. And they're doing, I'm on the vent at the moment. And so they tried they maxed me out on the full cannula airflow. Nothing was working. Then they put me on the vent. Nothing was working. So when they put me on the life flight, I died 3 times waiting on the air flight. Like code blue, resuscitated 3 times that day, waiting on my life flight. And my oxygen was 40% when they picked me up.
Yeah.
I was on all this stuff, bro, and it just kept on going down and down and down. So they were basically just prolonging my death.
Yeah.
So they picked me up in the life flight. I keep saying air flight, but life flight. And they took me to St. Joe's. It was actually quicker to put me in an ambulance, but I was so, what do they say? Like volatile. I was so, I had to be handled with so much care that just the bumps going down the road could have killed me.
Yeah.
So they decided to put me on the life flight. I don't know why I keep saying that. So I get over to St. Joe's, bro. They receive me. They put me on ECMO immediately. They try all these new things they never tried before. Obviously, I survived. 13 days later, they took me off ECMO, but I was in a coma for 30 days.
Yeah.
So when I woke up from a coma, I was completely paralyzed. I had no muscle in my body because even 14 days in a bed, you lose almost all muscle mass. The atrophy just sets in, and it's really, really hard to rehab that. Well, I was in the hospital. I was in a coma for 30 days with no movement, in the bed for 53 days. And so I had to learn everything again. I had to learn how to grab something. I had to learn how to move my fingers. I had to learn how to talk. I had to learn how to everything. And it was a wild ride, bro. And in that hospital room, remember I told you I grew up in church, but I didn't know God. I didn't know. I just knew the church, the things that happened in church. Well, when I woke up and all these doctors were coming in from all over the state, like, bro, you're the first person to live from this. You're the first person to actually come off of this ECMO and actually live to tell about it. And there, obviously miracle was the common language of the nurses and the doctors. Well, at that point, I'm like, okay, I know there is a higher power. Has to be. There's no way I survive this unless there's someone who can change the nature of the world, change the way things are supposed to go. So then I had to start figuring out what religion does this God belong to? And I never took for granted that it was Christianity because I wasn't a believer. I just grew up in it. Yeah. So I looked at Muslim, I looked at Jehovah's Witness, I looked at the Jewish faith, I looked at Islam, I looked at all this stuff. And I came through apologetics, I came to believe that the Christian faith is the only way.
Yeah.
So after that, I devoted my whole life to it. And you've known me for a few years. It's literally all I talk about. It's all I want to talk about. Yeah. And the Lord is using me in a lot of different ways to be a conduit for him. Yeah. And I couldn't be more excited.
That's crazy. And I really wanted to stop when you say you survived and clap it up because
yeah, for real.
Because the start of the story, even though it's your short version to like the end, you definitely can't deny that God wasn't involved, and give praise to God.
And even cooler, I met a lady who also was on ECMO a couple months after me, and she survived because of the formula they used on me.
Wow.
So we've connected. We've had dinner together and stuff like that. Awesome. Dude, I'm getting like freaking chill bumps because that's so cool, man.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And I'm just so thankful. You cannot look at stuff like this and think that we just came from nothing.
Right.
There has to be something.
Yeah.
And if that's you listening, there has to be something. I encourage you to check out Frank Turek on YouTube. Yeah. See what the Christian faith has to say.
He's a good one.
Yeah.
In physical health, it's easy to Google how to work out your chest more, right? Or how to get bigger biceps, right? In mental health, we come around and we are now like asking questions like, how's your mental health? Are you bipolar? See a therapist, right?
Yeah.
In soul health, unless you're Christian or unless you're of some religious mindset, there's no real questions or thoughts to kind of guide where your soul health care is. And my purpose with this podcast is really to just have a basic conversation of soul care.
Yeah.
If you were to ask yourself a question, if somebody were to ask you a question or you were to ask yourself a question that could change the trajectory of your soul health, what would that question be?
Sure. So in my efforts to witness, right, which is kind of what we're called to do, I've asked different questions like this to people just to kind of see what the human responds to. And I know that sounds kind of esoteric in a way, but that's how I think philosophically. Like, that's a human with kind of 3 or 4 different components there. I can talk to the body. How do I talk to the soul? Which I think it depends on how you think what that is. The Hebrews would say The Old Testament would say the soul is what animates the body. It's the personality. It's the desires. It's the kind of what makes Chris, right? What makes Sky, or whatever. And then you have the spirit component that's a lot of times tied to that. But I have asked a few people sometimes, what happens next, and how do you know you're sure about that? Like, just to get someone thinking, have you ever thought about what happens next in the next world or the next life? Or are you reincarnated? Do you just go back to dust? Is there nothing? Is there a black void? Is there another world? Is it universal? Like, and the very few times I've asked someone that and they've actually been willing to dialogue that with me, bro, you want to talk about opening someone's eyes. We are all finite beings, and I think we're all aware of that. No one has lived forever. No human, no regular human has lived forever. So when someone can relate on that level, now the question is, okay, so what do you think? What happens next? And I think that it's different for different people, because sometimes I ask that to people and they don't care. Maybe they don't want to talk about it, or maybe just planting a seed and getting on with it. Another way that has been good for me to talk to someone about their soul is the question of, why do you think there's evil? And I know that's basic, but that's one of the biggest fundamental reasons that people deny an eternal system. How could there be that if there's this, right? Yeah. And that's a long conversation, but it's worth checking out. So I would say to someone here, what I wish someone would have said to me there or back then, are you sure this is what it's all about? Are you sure? Are you, not looking at the camera, are you sure that this world, that your job, that your family, that your house, that your car, are you sure that's all that this is about? Or could there be something else going on that we can't see? And if you can answer that, then I think there's a way to start researching, because you cannot have blind faith. Nowhere in the Bible, nowhere does it tell us to have blind faith. Research. It's out there.
Yeah. I want to thank you, Schuyler, for your time. You've brought a lot of insight, information, education, and just some truth to a broad range of topics today. And I'm grateful for our relationship and our friendship, because you make me think a lot. You're definitely one of those people. I like to think that you have to be around smarter people, and you're definitely one of those guys that I like being around, because you challenge me, you keep me accountable. I appreciate you for that. I want to ask you, if you're comfortable, if you want to share like a resource of how people can connect with you.
Yeah, I would say the Scripture Bros is a podcast that myself and my friend Brandon do. We talk about things, Christian religion and other world religions, and we discuss on a conversational level, like what's going on with the religious world, if you will. So the Scripture Bros, it's on YouTube, and there's a way to contact us, myself or Brandon. And even if you want to look at those resources, that would be, go for it. It's not going to be everything that everyone agrees with, but we're just all, besides for the gospel, everything else is kind of like opinionated in a way. So it's okay. But I would say also, as a resource to someone who is just kind of getting into this and they want to know, the question I asked, is this all that there is? Check out the Bible Project. It's such a, man, what a wonderful resource. Yeah. It's an amazing resource.
You're like the 6th or 7th person now that is suggested.
It's awesome. Yeah. It's awesome.
No, that is a great resource. I use that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome.
I appreciate you, Schuyler. Thanks for your time. And we hope that through this conversation, you will today be able to say that you are alive and well.
Amen.